Let me start with something bold. The worst mistake humanity has ever made is not ignorance, it's silence. Silence about our bodies. Silence about intimacy. Silence about sexual health. For generations, people have been taught to feel shame instead of curiosity, fear instead of understanding. And that silence has consequences: misinformation, anxiety, broken relationships, and preventable health problems. Today, we're going to break that silence. What if the biggest thing holding you back isn't your body, but your silence? Think about that for a second. How many questions have you never asked? How many concerns have you ignored, not because they weren't important, but because you felt uncomfortable even thinking about them? That hesitation, that quiet pause, that voice in your head saying, "Don't talk about this," that's where the problem begins. From a young age, many people are conditioned to believe that conversations about their bodies, especially intimate ones, are inappropriate, embarrassing, or even wrong. So instead of learning, they stay quiet. Instead of understanding, they assume. And those assumptions slowly turn into beliefs that shape confidence, relationships, and health. Here's the reality. Silence doesn't protect you, it limits you. When you don't speak up, you don't get answers. When you don't get answers, confusion grows. And confusion often turns into unnecessary fear. A completely normal experience can suddenly feel like a problem, while a real issue might be ignored simply because no one ever talked about it openly. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine asking the question you've been avoiding. Imagine realizing that what you thought was abnormal is actually common. Imagine the relief, the clarity, the confidence that comes from simply knowing. That's the power of breaking silence. And this isn't just about information, it's about ownership. The moment you start speaking openly, you shift from being passive to being in control. You begin to understand patterns in your own body. You start recognizing what feels right and what doesn't. You stop relying on guesswork and start relying on knowledge. But here, where it gets even deeper, silence doesn't just affect what you know, it affects how you feel about yourself. When something is never talked about, it starts to feel like it shouldn't exist. And when you experience it anyway, you might think something is wrong with you. That's how insecurity is built, not from reality, but from the absence of honest conversation. Breaking that silence changes everything. It replaces doubt with clarity. It replaces isolation with connection. It reminds you that you're not the only one thinking, feeling, or experiencing these things. And let's be honest, confidence doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from understanding yourself fully, even the parts you were taught to ignore. So every time you choose to ask, to learn, to speak, even if it feels uncomfortable, you are dismantling years of misinformation. You are stepping out of a cycle that has kept people confused and uncertain for generations. Because the truth is, your voice is not something to hide. It's the key to understanding your own body and reclaiming control over your health and your confidence. What if the thing you're afraid of isn't actually the problem, but the lack of understanding is? Think about how fear works. It doesn't come from facts, it comes from uncertainty. The less you know about something, the more power it has over your mind. And when it comes to your body, that fear can become overwhelming because you're dealing with something deeply personal, something you can't just ignore or walk away from. So instead of seeking answers, many people do the opposite. They avoid. They overthink. They assume the worst. A small concern suddenly turns into a major worry, not because it actually is, but because there's no clear information to ground it. Now ask yourself, how many times have you Googled something and felt more confused than before? How many times have you compared yourself to unrealistic standards and thought, is something wrong with me? That spiral of doubt doesn't come from reality. It comes from misinformation mixed with fear. Here's the truth most people don't realize. Your body follows patterns, systems, and biology. It is not random. It is not unpredictable chaos. When you understand even the basics, how hormones work, how stress impacts your body, how mental state affects physical response, you start to see logic where you once saw confusion. And the moment logic enters the picture, fear starts to lose its grip. Because now, instead of thinking, something is wrong, You start asking, what could be causing this? That shift alone is powerful. It turns fear into curiosity. It turns panic into problem solving. But knowledge doesn't just remove fear, it replaces it with confidence. When you understand what's happening inside your body, you stop reacting emotionally to every change. You start recognizing what's normal for you. You begin to trust your body instead of doubting it. And that trust creates a sense of control that fear can never give you. Here's another hook to think about. People often chase quick fixes when they're afraid. They look for instant solutions, miracle answers, anything that promises to fix the problem without fully understanding it. But without knowledge, those solutions are just guesses, and guesses can lead to more frustration. Education changes that. It allows you to make informed decisions instead of desperate ones. It helps you separate myths from reality. It gives you the ability to filter out noise and focus on what actually matters. And perhaps most importantly, knowledge helps you communicate better, with professionals, with partners, and even with yourself. Instead of struggling to explain what you're feeling, you can describe it clearly. Instead of feeling embarrassed, you feel prepared. Fear thrives in silence and confusion. But the moment you start learning, even a little, you begin to take that power away from it. You start to see your body not as something mysterious and intimidating, but as something understandable and manageable. And once that shift happens, fear doesn't disappear overnight. But it no longer controls the way you think, the way you feel, or the way you respond. What if the problem was never your body, but the standard you've been comparing it to? Pause and really think about that. Who defined what normal even means? Was it science? Or was it social media, unrealistic expectations, and selective conversations that only show one version of reality? From an early age, people are exposed to narrow, often exaggerated ideas of how bodies should look, respond, and perform. Over time, those ideas become internalized. They start to feel like rules. And the moment your experience doesn't match those rules, doubt creeps in. Why am I not like that? Is something wrong with me? Am I less than others? But here's the truth that changes everything. Variation is not abnormal, it's biological. No two bodies function in exactly the same way. Differences in response, desire, sensitivity, timing, and preference are completely natural. Your body is shaped by a combination of genetics, hormones, mental state, experiences, and overall health. Expecting everyone to fit into one fixed definition of normal ignores how human biology actually works. And yet, comparison is powerful. It convinces you that there's a single standard you should be measuring yourself against. It turns natural differences into perceived flaws. It makes you question things that don't actually need fixing. Here's a hook to challenge that thinking. If everyone were truly normal in the exact same way, variation wouldn't exist. But it does everywhere you look. The issue isn't your body, it's the lens you're viewing it through. When you constantly compare yourself to unrealistic or incomplete representations, you're not seeing the full picture. You're seeing a curated version of reality, one that often leaves out the diversity that actually exists. And that distorted view can slowly erode confidence, even when nothing is medically or functionally wrong. Now imagine shifting that perspective. Instead of asking, "Do I match the standard?" you ask, "What is normal for me?" That question changes everything. It puts the focus back on your own body, your patterns, your responses, your comfort. Because your baseline matters more than anyone else's highlight. Understanding your own normal allows you to recognize changes more accurately. It helps you identify when something truly needs attention and when something is simply part of your natural variation. It removes unnecessary pressure and replaces it with awareness. And awareness builds confidence. Confidence doesn't come from fitting into a mold. It comes from knowing yourself well enough to stop chasing one. When you understand that your body is not wrong, you stop trying to fix things that aren't broken. You stop forcing expectations that don't align with your reality. Here's another hook. How much stress have you carried just from trying to meet an invisible standard? That stress alone can impact how your body functions. It can create a cycle where the pressure to be normal actually disrupts your natural responses, reinforcing the very doubt you started with. Breaking out of that cycle requires one shift, accepting that normal is not a single point, it's a range. And you exist within that range in your own way. When you stop comparing and start understanding, you create space for self-acceptance. And in that space, confidence grows, not because you've changed your body, but because you've changed how you see it. What if the thing quietly controlling your decisions, your confidence, and even your health isn't a physical issue at all, but a feeling you were never taught to question? Shame. It's subtle, it doesn't always show up loudly. Sometimes it's just a hesitation before asking a question, a moment of discomfort when thinking about your own body, a voice in your head that says, "Don't go there." And over time, that voice becomes powerful. Shame teaches you to hide instead of explore. It convinces you that curiosity is wrong, that questions are embarrassing, that certain topics should never be discussed. And the more you listen to it, the stronger it becomes. But here's the reality most people don't realize. Shame is learned, not natural. You weren't born feeling embarrassed about your body. That feeling developed through messages, spoken or unspoken, from culture, environment, and experiences. And once it's there, it starts shaping behavior in ways you may not even notice. Think about this. How many times have people avoided seeking help, not because they didn't need it, but because they felt too uncomfortable to talk about it? How many concerns stay unaddressed simply because bringing them up feels awkward? That's not a lack of need. That's the power of shame. Here's a hook to challenge that. If something is important for your health, why should it ever be off limits to talk about? Shame creates that contradiction. It makes essential conversations feel forbidden. It turns normal human experiences into something that feels isolating. And in that isolation, people start to believe they're the only ones dealing with certain thoughts or issues. But they're not. The difference is, some people push past that discomfort, and others stay stuck in it. When shame takes control, it doesn't just silence you externally, it affects how you think internally. You might start judging yourself for things that are completely natural. You might assume something is wrong without ever verifying it. You might avoid learning, simply because learning would require confronting that discomfort. And that avoidance has consequences. Because when you don't seek answers, you stay in uncertainty. When you stay in uncertainty, doubt grows. And that doubt can impact confidence, relationships, and even decision-making about your own well-being. Now imagine what happens when you start questioning shame instead of obeying it. Instead of thinking, "This is too embarrassing," you ask, "Why does this feel embarrassing?" That shift is powerful. It separates the feeling from the reality. It allows you to see that the discomfort isn't coming from the topic itself, it's coming from the meaning attached to it. And meanings can be changed. Here's another hook. What if the very thing you've been avoiding is the key to feeling more confident and in control? Because once you begin to push through that initial discomfort, something unexpected happens. The intensity of shame starts to fade. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once felt off-limits becomes just another part of understanding yourself. And with that shift comes freedom. Freedom to ask. Freedom to learn. Freedom to understand your body without judgment. Because shame only has power when it goes unchallenged. The moment you confront it, question it, and move through it, you begin to take that power back and replace it with clarity, confidence, and control. What if the biggest gap between you and confidence isn't skill, experience, or knowledge, but the conversations you're avoiding? Think about that. How many misunderstandings, frustrations, or doubts could have been resolved with a single honest conversation? And yet, so many people hold back. They assume instead of asking. They guess instead of expressing. They stay silent instead of being clear. And that silence creates distance. Because no matter how much you think someone understands you, no one can read your mind. Here's the truth. Communication is not just about talking, it's about revealing what's real. Your thoughts, your concerns, your preferences, your boundaries. These things don't become clear unless you make them clear. But here, where it gets complicated, many people hesitate because they fear judgment. They worry about saying the wrong thing. They think, what if this sounds awkward? Or what if I'm misunderstood? So instead of taking that risk, they say nothing. And in that moment, confusion takes over. Now imagine the opposite scenario. Imagine expressing something clearly and being understood. Imagine removing the guesswork entirely. That clarity doesn't just improve the situation, it builds confidence, because now you're not second-guessing yourself. Here's a hook to consider. Confidence is not built in silence, it's built in expression. The more you communicate, the more comfortable you become with your own voice. What once felt awkward starts to feel natural. What once felt difficult becomes easier over time. And that repetition creates a sense of control that silence never can. But communication isn't just about you. It's also about connection. When you open up, you give the other person the opportunity to understand you better. You create space for honesty on both sides. You replace assumptions with clarity. And that clarity strengthens trust because both people know where they stand. Without communication, people fill in the gaps themselves. And those assumptions are often wrong. Think about how many problems don't come from reality, but from misinterpretation. A lack of clarity can turn small issues into bigger ones simply because no one addressed them directly. Now here's another hook. What you don't say doesn't disappear, it just shows up in other ways. It can show up as frustration, confusion, hesitation, or even distance in a relationship. And over time, those unspoken things can build up, creating tension that could have been avoided entirely with open conversation. But when you communicate clearly, you remove that pressure. You bring everything into the open, where it can be understood and addressed. And here, where confidence really starts to grow, not just in being understood, but in knowing that you can express yourself without fear, that your voice matters, that your thoughts deserve to be heard. Communication also empowers you in situations where you need guidance. Whether you're speaking to a professional or someone close to you, being able to articulate what you're experiencing makes it easier to get the right support. It turns vague concerns into clear discussions. Because clarity leads to better outcomes. And the more you practice open communication, the more you realize that the fear around it was often bigger than the reality. Conversations that seemed difficult become manageable. Topics that once felt uncomfortable become easier to navigate. And with each honest conversation, you build a stronger sense of confidence, not just in others understanding you, but in your ability to express yourself clearly and without hesitation. What if the one thing standing between you and better health is the decision to take responsibility? Not luck, not genetics, not circumstances. Your decision. That might sound intense, but think about it. How often do people wait? They wait for problems to go away. They wait for someone else to bring it up. They wait until something becomes serious before they finally pay attention. And during that time, nothing improves. Here's a powerful question. What changes if you stop waiting and start acting? Because responsibility is not about blame, it's about ownership. It's the shift from "why is this happening to me?" to "what can I do about this?" And that shift changes everything because it puts you back in control. When you take responsibility for your health, you stop ignoring signals. You start paying attention to patterns. You notice changes instead of dismissing them. You become aware of how your habits, your stress levels, your sleep, and your mindset are all connected to how your body functions. And awareness leads to action. Here's the reality most people avoid. Your body gives you feedback all the time. The question is, are you listening or are you brushing it off? Because ignoring small signals often leads to bigger problems. What could have been addressed early becomes something more complicated, simply because it wasn't acknowledged in time. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of avoiding, you engage. You ask questions. You seek reliable information. You take steps, small or big, to improve your understanding and your well-being. That proactive mindset doesn't just improve outcomes, it builds confidence because now you're not reacting, you're leading. Here's a hook to challenge your thinking. No one knows your body better than you, but that only matters if you choose to learn about it. Taking responsibility also means letting go of passive habits. It means not relying on assumptions or waiting for reassurance without seeking clarity. It means recognizing that your health is not something you can outsource completely. Even when professionals are involved, your role is still essential. Because you are the one experiencing it. You are the one noticing the changes. You are the one who decides whether to act or delay. And that decision has consequences. Now here's another hook. Every action you take today shapes how your body responds tomorrow. The way you manage stress, the way you prioritize rest, the way you approach learning about your body, all of these things compound over time. Small choices don't stay small. They build into patterns, and those patterns define your overall health. When you take responsibility, you stop looking for quick fixes and start building long-term understanding. You stop chasing instant results and start creating sustainable habits. You become more intentional with your decisions because you understand that they matter. And that mindset creates a different kind of confidence, not the kind that comes from temporary solutions, but the kind that comes from knowing you are actively taking care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, responsibility is not a burden, it's a form of control. It's the ability to influence your own outcomes, to respond instead of react, to take steps instead of standing still. And once you step into that role, you begin to realize that you are not as powerless as you once thought. You are capable of making informed, intentional choices that directly impact your health, your confidence, and your overall well-being.